If it's considered routine evidence, it can be submitted by affidavit, and at trial there will be no opportunity to cross-examine the police officer on that evidence. And in our view, there's a danger that that will limit an accused's ability to defend themselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Les Patriotes Verchères, Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General has confirmed that for ordinary people, if you owe $5 to the CRA, they will follow you to the ends of the earth. However, that's not the same for others. You know, there are big clients, and for those big clients, Ottawa lets them get away with it on no grounds whatsoever. For those who have the means to hide their money abroad, there's no problem whatsoever. The problem with that is that we will never know how much we need to recover, because the CRA hopes to recover that money, but that's not what actually it tells us about. It tells us about the money that it actually has recovered. Now, we have deficits here, and these deficits are caused by people who are not paying their taxes, and Ottawa is complicit.
Newton.
Mr. President, Assalamu alaikum. Muslims around the world are celebrating Milad ul-Nabi, commemorating the birth, life, and message of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his teachings, which many Canadians hold dear and will celebrate over the coming days. Many Surrey-based masjids and organizations are holding prayers and celebrations. In my riding of Surrey Newton, I have and continue to look forward to joining all those in honoring Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his message of harmony, peace, and love. On behalf of all members in this House, I would like to extend my best wishes to all Muslim sisters and brothers celebrating Eid Milad ul-Nabi. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, the Trilateral Commission was established in 1973 to foster closer cooperation amongst Japan, Western Europe, and North America. It is a non-governmental, policy-oriented forum that brings together leaders from the worlds of business, government, academia, media, and civil society. It offers a global platform for open dialogue, aiming to find solutions to the great geopolitical, economic, and social challenges of our time. Members share a firm belief in the values of the rule of law, democratic government, human rights, freedom of speech, and free enterprise. At last week's meeting in Silicon Valley, the focus was on issues such as privacy and security, election interference, and how to strengthen democracy in the world. As a new member, I was honored to spend time among some of the brightest minds in the world, and I look forward to continuing to contribute to this significant entity, helping further democracy both home and abroad.
L'Honorable Député de Sudbury.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury.
Sudbury, an area rich in mining history, I'm pleased to highlight the importance of the minerals sector in Canada. This is a global industry, and Canada is an undisputed leader. In 2017 alone, Canadian mines produced over 60 minerals and metals worth nearly $44 billion, and the broader minerals sector directly employed more than 420,000 people. It is the second highest proportional employer of Indigenous peoples among the natural resources sector. That is why we are working diligently with provinces and territories, Indigenous communities, and industry from coast to coast to develop a Canadian minerals and metals plan. Le Plan Canadien pour les minéraux.
The Canadian Minerals Plan.
Ambitious goals and clear actions enabling Canada to remain a global mining leader while reflecting today's realities: climate change, sustainable development, social acceptability, advancing reconciliation with First Nations, and the transition to a modern economy. I ask all honourable members to join me in recognizing the importance of Canada's mineral sector to our economy and to communities across our country.
The Honourable Member for Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to mark the Trans Day of Remembrance and call attention to the 368 trans and gender diverse people who were murdered this past year and the more than 3,000 killed over the last decade worldwide. While Canada has explicitly recognized trans and gender diverse rights, policy changes on the ground and social acceptance lag far behind. Still, most places around the world remain much less safe than here. One of the highest rates of violence against trans and gender-diverse people is found in Central America. And we learned last week that within the caravan headed toward the U.S. border was a mini caravan of LGBTQ people, primarily made up of trans women. Due to the extreme threat of violence facing this group, we call on Mexico to ensure their safety. We call on the U.S. to allow these asylum claims to be heard, and we call for international monitoring of the continued safety of this group now at the U.S.-Mexico border. On this Trans Day of Remembrance, while we mourn lives lost, let us also salute and find strength in the bravery and resilience of this community.
The Honourable Member for St. John Rothsay.
Mr. Speaker, last week I was proud to attend the unveiling of a Parks Canada plaque commemorating the national historic importance of the founding of the St. John Labourers Benevolent Association in my riding of St. John Rothsay. St. John's ship labourers were amongst the earliest groups of day labourers or casual workers in British North America to organize when they formed the St. John Labourers Benevolent Association in 1849. After its merger with the International Longshoremen's Association in 1911, the strength of this union continued into the early 20th century when its members helped to form and found the New Brunswick Federation of Labour and shape provincial legislation establishing a workmen's compensation system. The founding of the union defied conventional views towards casual labourers, proving that it was indeed possible for casual labourers to successfully organize and lobby for their rights. Indeed, the precedent set by this union was instrumental in empowering workers across the Maritimes and indeed across Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Mr. Speaker, Remembrance Day, November the 11th, 2018, has passed, but the work of our local Royal Canadian Legion and Ladies Auxiliaries continues. Mr. Speaker, the Legions are an integral organization in many of our communities. In my riding in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, we have 19 Legions. Through the well-known Poppy campaign and other fundraising events, they provide support to veterans, our Canadian Forces and RCMP members in active duty, as well as their families. They keep alive the memory of the courage and the sacrifice of those who served our country. The Legions are also involved in community activities, including support for youth and seniors. In all of this, the Ladies Auxiliary provide vital financial and volunteer assistance. The work wouldn't get done without them. So, Mr. Speaker, to the Legion and the Ladies Auxiliary members in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, and across Canada, thank you for all that you do.
The Honourable Member for Mission, Matsqui, Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, agriculture is an exciting and dynamic industry that is full of opportunities, but it is not without challenges. I rise today to recognize both the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food and Farm Credit Canada for raising mental health awareness within the farming industry. My riding, Mission Matsqui, Fraser Canyon, has a high concentration of farmers, and it is important that both individuals and families receive support throughout stressful situations. I'm pleased that farmers will have improved access to wellness resources with the FCC launching their Mental Health Strategies Guide. Mental health issues can affect anybody. It is important to have these discussions. I'm proud to join my colleagues and the agriculture community in removing the stigma surrounding mental health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today to talk about an important issue facing Canadian farmers, mental health. I am the granddaughter of a cattle farmer and well know the pride, strength, and independence demonstrated by our farmers. I've heard firsthand from farmers in my riding of New Brunswick Southwest of the uncertainty, the unpredictability, the stresses of weather, market forces, and wanting to pass the family farm on to new generations. The feelings of anxiety, stress, depression, isolation are not easy to share. It's time to break this barrier of stigma. There is no question we need our farmers. And I am pleased that the Agricultural Committee is completing the investigative study of the mental health and physical well-being of our farmers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill. Mr. Speaker, today is Navy Day, a day dedicated to the men and women of the Royal Canadian Navy, the Canadian Coast Guard, and the Exceptional Sailors Program. Our senior service traces its roots back to Tudor times in England, where a standing navy was established long before a standing army, and of course an air force was still a theoretical Da Vinci dream. The Royal Canadian Navy's beginnings date back to 1910, growing quickly during the First World War, and by end of the Second World War, Canada had the third largest navy in the world. The Canadian Coast Guard, formed in 1962, now boasts a fleet of more than 100 vessels of various purposes and sizes. Now, challenges do remain with procurement, the shipbuilding program, and partisan interference. Bravo Zulu, Admiral Norman. But, Mr. Speaker, today we salute the men and women who have served in war and peace and who serve now in Canadian waters and around the world. Paratai, Viro, Paratai. Ready, I ready. The honourable member for Guelph.
Mr. Speaker, mental health is a growing concern for Canadians, but few would put farming on the list of most stressful careers. According to testimony heard at the Agriculture and Agri-Food Committee, farmers are one of the groups that is most at risk of suicide due to climate change, the stressful work environment, isolation, and growing misconceptions about the nature of farming and the food that farmers produce. La semaine dernière,
Last week, Farm Credit Canada sent its first edition of a brochure to help in resilience of producers.
Mental health and agriculture. I'd like to thank the witnesses who have had the courage to come forward to provide us with testimony that will help our committee to develop recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in solemn commemoration of the 85th anniversary of the Ukrainian famine and genocide known as the Holodomor. In 1932, Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union set a horrific policy to confiscate food and resources from Ukraine. This resulted in the intentional starvation and death of millions of people. At the height of Holodomor, 28,000 people died per day, and over 30% were children under 10. For over half a century, the Holodomor was denied and covered up by the Soviet regime. Today is Holodomor Memorial Day, and we remember the victims of this senseless crime against humanity. As leaders across this country, let us commemorate this act of genocide and stand up against the prejudice and hate that will seek to divide us. Thank you.
Honourable member for Bow River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, our Alberta Conservative Rural Crime Caucus Task Force reported its findings. They should be cause for significant alarm. We found that rural residents are afraid and angry. They're afraid and angry because the RCMP cannot respond to crimes in a timely manner. They're afraid and angry because our justice system is a revolving door. They're afraid and angry because this government has done little about it.
Pay attention, Trudeau.
We need serious leadership from this government to shape a multi-jurisdictional approach that will address rural crime. We need to keep dangerous repeat offenders behind bars. We need to bolster rural RCMP detachments. Rural crime levels have risen, but staffing levels have not. This situation is only getting worse, but the Liberals continue to introduce bills that punish law-abiding gun owners and make serious offences punishable by a mere fine, while doing nothing to combat gun violence and illegal handguns. They're completely out of touch with rural Canadians. Thank you.
The Honourable Mentor for Edmonton Centre.
This Trans Day of Remembrance, a day to honour those whose lives were lost through systemic violence because they were transgender. It is a day to reflect on the abuse and hatred still faced by transgender people around the world simply for being themselves.
We committed to protecting the rights of all Canadians. We made certain that non-binary individuals would be protected under the Criminal Code and the Canadian Human Rights Act, and we have provided support to marginalized communities around the world.
Despite this protection, trans people still remain targeted, harassed, assaulted, and discriminated against every day, stopping them from living their lives and being loved and participating in our communities. En tant que pays,
as a country, we must pay tribute to the incredible lives of the many transgender people we have lost, and we must acknowledge that much remains to be done.
Today, by remembering those lost due to bigotry and hate, we're continuing the fight for justice, for equality, and for a better future for all.
The honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Each year during Waste Reduction Week, elementary students in Port Moody Coquitlam participate in my annual Litterless Lunch Challenge. The challenge encourages students to pack litter-free lunches and make waste reduction part of their everyday routine. This year, more than 600 students participated, and today, I'd like to congratulate the winning class, who went an amazing 98.6% litter-free. Miss McKay's grade 1, 2, 3 class at Miller Park Community School in Coquitlam. Congratulations. Mr. Speaker, an average elementary school produces more than 20,000 pounds of lunch waste annually, and in the 7 years that we've run this challenge, more than 2,600 students and 45 schools have participated, diverting over 1,200 kilograms of waste. Thanks to all the students, teachers, and parents who participated. I hope you continue to work on your waste reduction efforts all throughout the year. Thank you.
The honourable member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to join this House in solemnly remembering the Ukrainian Holodomor of 85 years ago. The systemic starvation of a region, then considered Europe's breadbasket by Stalin's communist regime, cost the lives of millions of Ukrainians. As communities across Canada gather to honour these victims, my own community of Oshawa shall do the same. Oshawa has a vibrant Ukrainian presence that began with Julian Falinko in 1907, the first documented Ukrainian to arrive in Oshawa. More Ukrainians began arriving during the First World War and following the Holodomor, and by 1941 the number of people of Ukrainian origin only trailed those of English, Irish, and Scottish origin. As their numbers grew, they built churches such as St. George the Great Martyr and St. John the Baptist, as well as community halls like Dnipro, Lviv, and Odessa. They are all places where members of our community celebrate, experience Ukrainian culture, dance, and of course, Ukrainian food. However, this Sunday, the 25th, we will gather at St. John the Baptist Ukrainian Church to remember those lives that were lost during the Holodomor. We will not forget.
The honourable member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, agriculture is a dynamic industry full of opportunities. However, psychological distress on the farm is an issue that concerns me both as a member and as a former producer. Earlier today, we announced a partnership with 4-H Canada to raise awareness amongst 24,000 young people and 7,700 monitors about the importance of mental health. This week, Farm Credit Canada is launching an initiative to reduce stigma around mental health by delivering a bilingual pamphlet to all agricultural addresses in the country. This brochure will contain testimonies, advice, and tools to help manage the stress of agricultural producers, and it will also include contact information for resources. Furthermore, we have announced that we will be collaborating with Farm Management Canada to study the connection between mental health and decision-making on the farm. Ensuring the psychological health of producers also contributes to the economic health of our regions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, questions orales. The honourable member for Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance will present to the House his fall economic update. But let's recap with a couple of things that we already do know. We already know that in the election campaign of 2015, This government promised no more than a $10 billion surplus or $10 billion deficit per year. I only wish it was a surplus. $10 billion deficit per year that would be balanced by the time we reach the next election in 2019. We know that both of those are untrue, but perhaps the Prime Minister can tell us today, has he set a date for us on which the budget will be balanced?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in 2015, Canadians had a choice. There were two parties that believed in cuts, while we promoted investments in the middle class and in people working hard to join it. We lowered taxes for the middle class and raised them on the wealthiest 1%. We delivered a more generous, fair, and tax-free Canada Child benefit that gives more money to 9 out of 10 Canadian families and is lifting hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty. We now have some of the lowest unemployment rates in 40 years. While Conservatives continue to defend their wealthy friends, we'll continue to stay focused on the...
The Honourable Member, order. The Honourable Member from Milton.
This from the Trust Fund,
well,
baby.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know. Maybe some of his friends from Cape Breton are rich. I can tell you not a lot of mine are.
That's right.
So I'll continue to talk to the people in Milton who certainly don't share the same set of friends that this Prime Minister does. But to the point that the Prime Minister indicated, which is this, he said that Canadians made a choice. You know what that choice was, Mr. Speaker? That choice was to keep deficits to $10 billion a year, and that choice was to return to a balanced budget by the time we got to the next election. That was the fundamental promise this government broke. He can fix it. Tell us when the budget will be balanced.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite, and I don't blame her for it, seems to be forgetting the last years of the Harper government, where they nickeled and dimed their veterans, where they shut down veteran services offices, where they demonstrated tax breaks for the wealthiest and boutiques tax cuts, while not creating the kind of growth that Canadians needed from their economy. There was a choice in the 2015 election. We committed to put more money in the pockets of the middle class. We committed to invest in infrastructure in a way that would grow the economy, and that's exactly what we delivered, what they couldn't.
Honourable Member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians certainly understand that this Prime Minister knows how to spend, but the question is whether or not he knows how to balance the budget, and we still don't have a date. If he wants to compare records in terms of what we did in order to ensure that middle-class and struggling Canadians did well, I might invite him to take a look at the education tax credit, the tuition tax credits, the children's fitness tax credits, the children's arts tax credit. All those things mattered immensely to my riding constituents in Milton, Ontario. He took that away, and he's going to pay for it.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, those measures that the member opposite put forward were not available to low-income Canadians, Mr. Speaker. That is the difference between us and them. They keep putting forward non-refundable tax credits. We knew that directly delivering money to families with the Canada Child benefit, tax-free, unlike the taxable benefits that they put forward, was the best way to help the Canadians. And it's not just the best way to help the middle class. It was actually the best way to grow the economy, because the confidence, the jobs created, and the economic growth is thanks to Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the Prime Minister committed to posting modest deficits. These modest deficits are now more than $20 billion a year. It's as if this PM thought he was governing with monopoly money. Completely false, Mr. Speaker. This money has been earned by Canadians the hard way, and it comes out of their pockets. My question to the Prime Minister, for the fourth time in 2 days, when will we return to a balanced budget? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians had a choice in 2015. They could have chosen the Conservatives or the NDP, who could have caught at all costs to not have a deficit or commit to investing in communities. They knew that that's how we would create the economic growth that was so sadly lacking during the Harper years. We have the lowest unemployment rate in 40 years, the greatest growth rate in the G7. We brought in the Canada Child benefit, which will lift The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, while this Prime Minister is reciting the same lines day in, day out, we have racked up an $80 million deficit. For people who are listening, what does this mean? It means 470 arenas, like the ones where the Senators play, these Canadian Tire Centres, 470 of them. Now, it is enough. When are we going to return to a balanced budget? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member was not here at the time, but Prime Minister Harper added $150 billion to our debt. We have created growth because we trust Canadians, because we have invested in infrastructure, community infrastructure, public transit, which is making a difference in the lives of people. We're going to continue to do this, as Canadians asked us to do in 2015. The Honourable Member for Rimouski, Niger-Témiscouata-les-Basques. Mr. Speaker, it's been months now that the CRA has been persecuting ordinary Canadians and being ever so delicate with the rich and big corporations. Now, who agrees with us, Mr. Speaker? The Auditor General. While the CRA was persecuting single mothers in Saskatchewan, the Auditor General's report confirmed that they were giving more time playing buddy-buddy with the richest among us and big corporations in particular. Why this double standard? The Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Auditor General for his advice, and we are resolute that the things be done justly and uniformly so that everyone pays their fair share. They will be examining their internal processes to make sure that things are done uniformly with respect to the tax system. Because of our unprecedented investments, we will be able to look at people who are evading, engaged in tax evasion, and they will have to face the consequences. The Right Honourable Member. Now,
your agency is that when you are not a rich Canadian, you're presumed guilty until you can prove you're innocent. But if you're a wealthy Canadian or part of corporate Canada, you're innocent until the CRA can prove your guilt. And because that's way more difficult than to go after people who can't defend themselves, then the wealthy go scot-free. As a result, in the last 5 years, Canada has foregone $16 billion. $16 billion in unpaid taxes. I'm asking the Prime Minister again, when will Liberals put an end to this unacceptable double standard in CRA operations?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we've made historic investments in the CRA for the fight against tax evasion. We've fully adopted the international standard for automatic information exchange with our partners in the OECD. We've provided resources so that the CRA is better able to identify taxpayers who participate in aggressive tax avoidance schemes. With respect to offshore tax evasion, the CRA has more than doubled the number of completed offshore audits since we've taken office. Unlike the Harper Conservatives, fighting tax evasion in Canada is and abroad.
L'honorable député de Rosemont.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont, La Petite Patrie.
Of climate bad guys, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and guess who? Canada. A study confirms that the Liberal policies will drive the world above a catastrophic 5-degree warming. The Liberals aren't doing enough, and everybody knows it. In Quebec, more than 200,000 people signed the pact and pledged to reduce their pollution. Nobody's buying the Liberal delusion that everything is fine. Does the Prime Minister really believe that he can fool all people all the time?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, everything is not fine, and that's why we're moving forward with a historic plan to fight climate change in this country. We're working to reduce emissions across the Canadian economy, to create jobs and meet international commitments. Our actions include pricing pollution across Canada, accelerating the phase-out of traditional coal power, making historic investments in cleaner infrastructure like public transit and charging stations for electric vehicles, adopting regulations to cut methane emissions from oil and gas by 40 to 45% by 2025 and more. Canadians know this government is serious.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-le-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, yes, we have to put a price on pollution, but it's not enough. According to a study, the present policies of the Liberal government would lead to a catastrophic warming of 5 degrees Celsius. We're in the exclusive club of the bad guys with Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia. Everyone knows this, but the Prime Minister in Quebec, more than 200,000 people signed the Pact for a Transition. They walk the talk. They're serious about the environment. When will the Prime Minister walk the talk? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are walking the talk. Contrary to the NDP, we put a price on pollution across Canada. We have helped Canadian families be able to succeed in this transition. We are investing in renewable energies, in the green economy, in new technologies. We are delivering on an ambitious plan to fight climate change for today and for future generations. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Here's a little fable. The Prime Minister had spent recklessly and then was unprepared. When there was a crisis, not one little dollar left, only holes in the budget. They asked him, what did you do when we had a strong economy? You just kept spending. When will the Prime Minister realize that this is not a fairy tale nugget and tell us when he'll balance the budget? The Honourable Finance Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his question and his poetry. Mr. Speaker, it's important to remind Canadians that in 2015, Canadians wondered whether we were moving into a recession. And there was very little growth. What we did was to spend and invest in Canadians, and our growth rate is the strongest in the G7. The Honourable Member from Mégantic-L'Érable, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister says that the budget will balance itself. This is a poor example for Canadians who are piling up credit cards and debt. Will the Prime Minister say continue to spend one day by magic, this will happily end? Canadians can't say to their banker one day, I don't know when I'll be able to pay. When will the budget balance? What is the day? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2015, Canadians had a choice, either austerity and cuts or the Liberal Party plan. And Mr. Speaker, we decided to invest in Canadians, and now Canadians have $2,000 more in their pockets than when the Conservatives were around. Whereas the Conservatives were giving cuts to those who were the richest. Now what we're doing is working. Our economy is working full throttle, and we are doing far better than they did. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, there this millionaire trust fund Prime Minister goes again. While he forces taxpayers to fund his nanny services, he had the audacity to attack soccer moms and students as too rich as justification for taking away tax credit for kids' sports, arts, textbooks, and education. The average middle-class family is paying $800 more in taxes since this government took office. And even with all the extra revenue from those tax hikes, the deficit is almost $20 billion. When will the budget finally balance itself?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the member for Carleton keeps on quoting a study by the Fraser Institute that fails to take into account the Canada Child Benefit. In fact, the author of that study say that the Canada Child Benefit is a disincentive to hard work and independence because it fosters dependence on government. I would argue that the 18,000 children whose family receive more because of the Canada Child Benefit are hardworking Canadians, that the Canada Child Benefit is helping to make ends meet, and we stand by that policy that's lifting 300,000 kids out of poverty. And by the end of by next year, Canadian families will have $2,000 more in their pocket than they had under the previous government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, those same kids to whom we were the first party to actually directly fund child care benefits are also, we did it. The difference is we did it with a balanced budget. When we introduced child care benefits, we balanced the budget. When we boosted those child care benefits, we also had a balanced budget because we wanted those kids to benefit today and for the rest of their lives instead of having to pay interest to wealthy liberal bondholders and bankers in the sum of billions of dollars a year. The Prime Minister said the budget would balance itself. When?
The honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it's a creative vision of history. They added $150 billion to the debt, Mr. Speaker. The one thing they did with their form of Canada Child Benefit was tax it and take pictures next to the printing machine with a nice blue polo conservative shirt. That's what they did. We've taken a different approach, Mr. Speaker, with a tax-free child benefit that's lifting hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty in this country. That's helped grow the economy, and the results speak for themselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, he got me there. I did wear a Conservative T-shirt, but the Prime Minister can appreciate that at least I kept my shirt on. I assure you that is what helps me with my re-election chances, Mr. Speaker. But the Prime Minister promised the budget would balance itself. Will he stand now, keep his shirt on, and tell us when that will finally happen?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to correct the member for Carleton. Not just the Prime Minister thanks him, I think 35 million Canadians. But all jokes aside, Mr. Speaker, when you look at the economic record of the Conservative Party in the decades that they were in power, we've seen the lowest levels of growth in 69 years, the lowest employment job creation since 1946. I mean, compare and contrast, and you'll see that our Liberal record is strong, and we stand by it. Thank you very much.
Honourable member for Carleton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister famously promised that the budget would balance itself. He said that would happen just next year. We only have about 40 more sleeps until next year comes. And only one more sleep until this fall economic update in which we're supposed to find out about the finances of the nation. So, very simple question. If the budget will balance itself, then when will the budget balance itself?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, just to remind the member for Carleton, in the 2015 election, Canadians were debating whether Canada was in a recession or heading into a recession. We had slow growth, slow job creation, and Canadians decided to take the approach of investing in infrastructure, giving more money to the middle class to help grow this economy. We've had the fastest growth in the G7 in 2017. We've seen over 500,000 full-time jobs be created in the last 3 years, Mr. Speaker, and we see at the same time our debt-to-GDP ratio steadily going down, Mr. Speaker. This is fiscally responsible, and this is growing our economy. Thank you.
The honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Today, over 100 advocates are here calling for universal affordable childcare. Costs here are among the highest in the world. Some families pay more for childcare than they do for rent, and our system barely serves 1 in 4 kids. Canada's investing a fraction of what's needed to solve the childcare crisis. After voting down every progressive fix to pay equity in committee this morning, when will this government take some real action on gender equality and invest in affordable, universal childcare?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Social Development.
I remind remind the member opposite that this government has invested in childcare, $7.5 billion over the next 10 years, a direct investment partnered not only with the provinces and territories, but we also have the first distinction-based Indigenous childcare policy in the history of this country. We didn't stop there, though. We also provided the Canada Child Benefit, which, as my colleague has said, is now being indexed. Additionally to that, a $40 billion national housing strategy. We are heavily focused on reducing child poverty, supporting families, and making sure we build the most resilient generation of Canadian children in this country's history.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, today is the International Day of the Child, but we can't celebrate when 1.4 million children are living in poverty throughout the country. Sending a check to a family and saying, that's it, it's solved, is just not enough. We need affordable daycare, we need pharmacare, we need dental care, we need programs to help the 38% of Indigenous children who live in poverty. I'm calling on the government. When will you bring in ambitious measures to really lift children out of poverty? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Ambition. In their campaign platform, they promise not to spend any money on anything unless they balance the budget first. That is not an ambitious program, nor is it ambitious to spend provincial and territorial money and not stand up as a federal government. This government has invested $7.5 billion in childcare, invested in a national housing strategy, EI reforms that have supported families as well. This government is committed to lifting children out of poverty. 300,000 so far, 600,000 Canadians. Our work is not done, and our investments haven't finished either.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister responsible for StatsCan said he'd learned about the harvesting data project in the media. And yet the Act stipulates that the Minister must be informed before the Statistician-in-Chief undertakes new projects. What is the Minister doing to protect Canadians' privacy? What sanction will be levied against the Statistician-in-Chief for having broken the law? When will the Minister put an end to this project? The Minister, Mr. Speaker, our government takes Canadians' privacy very seriously, and we understand their concerns. The Chief Statistician was clear that he would pay careful attention to concerns about privacy. No data has been shared by StatsCan within the framework of this project. We will always protect Canadians' privacy.
People want to know that this minister cares about privacy, and yesterday we learned that he learned about this plan to collect personal financial data from over 1 million Canadians only after it was reported in the media. Now, the law says clearly that the minister must be informed before the chief statistician can move forward with any mandatory data collection. Can the minister clearly state to this House, was he or his office informed about this project to harvest the personal financial information of millions of Canadians after it was reported? Yes or no?
Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, one of the key issues the members opposite have raised are issues around privacy and data protection. We understand those concerns, and the chief statistician in committee, both in the House of Commons and the Senate, said he will only proceed when those issues around privacy and data protection are dealt with. With regards to personal information, no personal information will be shared with any private entities. No government agency, the CRA, RCMP, even the Prime Minister can compel Statistics Canada for this information. Privacy and data protection are absolutely essential, and our government supports that position.
Honourable Member for Central, Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, notice he didn't answer the question. The minister stated yesterday at committee that he learned about the plan to collect personal financial data from over 1 million Canadians when it was reported in the media. Now, the law says he must be told before any request can be made. The government has already told the banks that they must provide this information. Is the minister suggesting that Statistics Canada violated the law by not notifying him?
Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, this is a pilot project with regards to the next steps. The Chief Statistician statistician has been very clear. He will only proceed if issues around privacy and data are dealt with in a meaningful way. The member opposite knows no information has been obtained, no information has been shared. With respects to privacy, we've been very clear that no government, no agency, no authority can compel any personal information from Statistics Canada, and we've been very clear. We also share the concerns around privacy and data protection, and we welcome the work the Privacy Commissioner is doing.
The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicolet.
I see the minister is getting ready for skating weather because he's skating around this issue and won't address it. Now, the law says he must be notified, but the minister says he wasn't. The minister is either incapable of managing his own department or officials were hiding things from him. Now, we know that StatsCan makes over $100 million a year selling data to corporations. Did Statistics Canada choose not to tell the minister their plans because they want to sell this data to large international businesses, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is making up his own facts. He doesn't believe in good quality, reliable data. He doesn't understand the fact that no personal data is ever shared by Statistics Canada. That's what he's implying when he asked that question. Let's be very clear. This was a pilot project. No information was obtained. And Statistics Canada is working with the Privacy Commissioner to deal with issues around privacy and data protection. The fundamental problem here is that the members opposite do not support Statistics Canada. They do not support good quality, reliable data. And that's the real issue here, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the project to establish a Francophone university in the largest city of Canada is a symbol of pride for Ontario and for Francophone communities across the country. But the decision by Mr. Ford to attack the Franco-Ontarian community was to satisfy the Conservative base, and there are many national implications involved in that. Can the Prime Minister, or is the Prime Minister rather, prepared to work with the Franco-Ontarian community, prepared to ensure the future of this institution? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague opposite for his excellent question. 5 days since the Black Thursday, when the Conservative government in Ontario and the Conservatives generally decided to launch this attack on Franco-Ontarians, 5 days since the leader of the Conservative Party has not denounced what's happening in Ontario. We are going to work with all members of the House to bring pressure to bear on the Conservative Party to ensure that they defend the rights of linguistic communities and Franco-Ontarians.
Honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Doug Ford n'est pas le seul.
Doug Ford isn't the only one to abandon Francophone universities. The government abandoned Saint-Jean campus at the Francophone University in Edmonton. But the Francophone population in Alberta has increased and the number of students has doubled. Funding can't keep pace, and the Liberals aren't spending the funds. At least the NDP in Alberta has taken over. Why aren't the Liberals supporting Campus Saint-Jean?
Alors.
Order.
L'honorable ministre de Bilinguisme.
The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Campus Saint-Jean is very important. I've been there several times, including with my parliamentary secretary and the member for Edmonton Centre. It's an extraordinary institution, and that's why we have decided to increase funding for linguistic minority groups. We've increased budgets for all linguistic communities, and we are going to continue to support them. We've invested $2.7 million in official languages, the largest investment in the history for official languages, and Francophones outside Quebec and Anglophones in Quebec. No. The Honourable Member for Vimy.
Monsieur le Président, cette semaine est la...
Mr. Speaker, this week is GBA Plus Awareness Week, and an opportunity for us as parliamentarians to participate in events and activities and learn more about this issue.
Decision-making affects diverse groups of people is key to achieving gender equality. Can the Minister of Status of Women tell this House what the government is doing to enhance implementation of GBA Plus across federal departments?
Honourable Minister.
I thank my honourable colleague, Mr. Speaker, and she knows, as we all do, that the impact of government decisions are felt differently by Canadians depending on a variety of factors, including where they live, how they identify, and or their official language of choice. Our government relies on GBA Plus to assess and to mitigate for any differential impacts, and our approach is working. The economy is growing, and we are advancing equality. This week at the GBA Plus Forum, our government will be sharing our successes and looking for ways to further collaborate with leaders from across sectors so that together we can grow the middle class and support those working hard.
The honourable member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada's oil is being liquidated at $17 a barrel, while our international competitors are getting $54. This discount is costing the Canadian economy $80 million each and every day, and is a direct result of the Liberals' cancellation of the Northern Gateway, the Trans Mountain, and the West to East pipeline projects. Now, the Liberals have proposed something new. It's called the No New Pipelines Bill C-69. This is going to make this discount permanent. Will the government kill Bill C-69 and allow pipelines to be built, or are they prepared to allow this discount to continue?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, the challenges experienced by the energy sector are real, and we're working with the energy sector as well as province of Alberta to deal with them. But let's look at the facts. What we are seeing today happening in Alberta is the result of a decade of inaction by the previous government to build a single pipeline to take our resources to non-U.S. markets. 99% of Alberta's oil is sold to only one single customer, which is the United States. We're focused on reducing that dependency by moving forward on the pipelines in the right way.
The honourable member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Stephen Harper never cancelled one pipeline. That minister has cancelled 3. Yeah. Today, Canada Action has initiated a campaign to inform Canadians of what the Liberals' failures are costing the Canadian economy. Tens of billions of dollars are lost as discounted Canadian oil flows to the United States, and this Prime Minister is making it worse with Bill C-69. So the question is simply, will he kill his No New Pipelines Bill C-69, or is he going to continue to allow the energy sector to fail and everybody who works in it fail as well?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Stephen Harper's government failed to build a single pipeline to take our resources to non-U.S. markets. That's the result that we are seeing today. And we are also seeing the increased investment in the energy sector, despite the opposition beating down on the energy sector. Close to $500 billion of new investment is being planned for Alberta's energy sector, including $40 billion LNG project investment that we saw, the single largest private sector investment in Canada's history. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
In reality, the Liberals killed the only new options for exports to the Asia-Pacific and to Europe. They drove away more than $100 billion in energy projects, the worst loss in more than 7 decades. Over 100,000 Canadians lost their jobs. The pipelines and discount crisis harms other sectors in all provinces. ATP's chief economist says, quote, "This is a national problem, and we could see layoffs in early 2019. It could spawn, if not a recession, at least another slowdown for the Canadian economy." So other than more empty words, what will this minister actually do to fix the crisis the Liberals caused?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when energy workers needed help, we stood with them. We were the government that extended EI benefits for struggling energy sector workers, which the Conservative government voted against, Mr. Speaker. This
Order. 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 We need to hear from both sides, and members including the Honourable Opposition House Leader, need to listen to both the questions and the answers. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources has the floor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think they can't accept the reality that they failed the energy sector, and that's why they make so much noise. We were there to stand with them when energy workers needed our support, and we will continue to support them in a way by building the pipeline capacity, by supporting them in the time of need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Well, clearly the Liberals want EI checks, but Conservatives want paychecks for Canadians. But last year, the Prime Minister, he said he wants to phase out the oil sands. And last spring, he said he regrets Canada can't get off oil, quote, tomorrow. The Prime Minister killed the only two pipelines meant for export to new markets. It's a travesty. Canada's the most responsible oil producer, with the third largest reserves and the fourth largest exports. The Liberals' sabotage of Canadian energy caused this crisis and now even calls for decreased production. Can the Liberals be honest for once? Isn't this actually exactly what the Prime Minister wants?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's really disappointing to hear from the member from Alberta that when workers need EI extension and benefits they deserve, that they don't deserve those benefits. That's very, very disappointing to see that kind of attitude.
Order. The honourable members for Battle River, Crowfoot, and perhaps Brant Airdrie seem to think that they can speak without having the floor. I remind them that's not the case. The Honourable Minister. Order. The member for Signal Hill, Calgary Signal Hill, will also come to order. The Honourable Minister of Natural, unless he wants to exit. Order. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, as I have stated earlier, we are focused on building the pipeline capacity because we understand that reducing the dependency on our single customer, which is the U.S., should be our focus in order to support our energy sector the right way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Esquimalt Saanich Soup.
Mr. Speaker, a year ago in Vancouver, the Defence Minister made modest promises to recommit Canada to UN peacekeeping. But last weekend, the Minister announced that the only concrete part of that promise that he actually kept, providing Canadian medevac support for the UN mission in Mali, will come to an abrupt end in July. That's after just 1 year and with no other nation lined up to fill that gap. Will the Minister demonstrate Canada's firm support for UN peacekeeping by extending our Mali mission by at least 6 months or until a replacement can be found?
Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of our government's support to the United Nations and the announcement that we made last year in support of the United Nations. We're very proud of the work that our Air Task Force are doing in Mali. Our government support to the United Nations is far broader than the Air Task Force. It's about a whole-of-government approach. It's about providing and focusing on smart pledges that the United Nations had asked for. We will be looking at other support as well in terms of a quick reaction acts for. It's about increasing the number of women on peace support operations, which we are also supporting on, and also reducing the number of child soldiers that will help reduce conflict. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've learned today that Saudi Arabia, despite the fragile ceasefire with Yemen, has resumed bombing the port of Hodeidah, the one used to move 80% of humanitarian assistance, which presumably includes Canadian assistance. So we give humanitarian aid to Yemen, but we sell weapons to the country that's preventing the humanitarian assistance from reaching its destination. Can someone explain the logic behind that? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, as regards Saudi Arabia and the war with Yemen, I want to underscore something. First of all, we condemn the death of journalist Khashoggi and have called for a ceasefire in Yemen. We are actively looking at other measures, including the use of the Magnitsky Law, and new export permits will not be granted.
Fjord.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the Australian F-18s will be a liability for the Royal Canadian Air Force and for taxpayers. The capability gap is nothing more than a political play to detract Canadians from more urgent problems. There's a shortage of pilots, technicians. Our fleet is currently unable to be fully operational. Our pilots can't get in the number of flying hours they need. The fighter jet fleet needs renewing. When will the government cancel the purchase of the F-18?
Mr. Speaker, our government will ensure our women and men of the Royal Canadian Forces have the appropriate equipment that they need to do their jobs. And we want to thank the Auditor General for his important work and recommendations, and I encourage the member to read the entire report on this. The report confirms that we have what we have always known. The Harper Conservatives mismanaged the fighter jet file and misled Canadians for over a decade. The report confirms the capability gap exists, and which started under the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the Harper Conservatives, we will not compromise on our ability to meet our NATO and NORAD commitments. Thank you.
The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if there was a capability gap under us, it would have been found in the ATIP, the access to information request that came forward that said there were 0 documents about a capability gap. And we know that the Liberals invented this capability gap to give cover for the Prime Minister's naive election promise. And they used this fabricated gap to justify the purchase of rusted-out Australian jets. Now, the Auditor General report was perfectly clear. These used jets will not meet Canada's international military commitments. Will the Prime Minister follow the Auditor General's advice and cancel the purchase of these old, used Australian fighters?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his question and his passion for support of the Canadian Armed Forces, but I want to quote the Auditor General's report, and I quote, "Having a combat-capable fighter force is important to Canadian and national security and to national defence's ability to meet Canada's commitments to NORAD and to NATO, Mr. Speaker." Mr. Speaker, that's why we have launched a full competition to replace all for our fighters, Mr. Speaker, and not 65 fighters that Mr. Speaker that the previous government asked for, 88, because that's what's going to be required to meet our commitments, Mr. Speaker, and we are making commitments.
Order. The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General clearly pointed out that over the last 3 years, pilots have been leaving in droves because of that minister's mismanagement. Well, Mr. Speaker, this proves that the Prime Minister and the Liberals have been playing political games with our Air Force. He is willing to spend billions on trying to upgrade jets that are falling apart instead of investing that money into a new fighter fleet. And the Air Force can't even recruit enough pilots because they don't want to fly these old Australian fighter jets. When will this Prime Minister be honest with Canadians and with the Air Force members and cancel this purchase of obsolete Australian jets?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank again the member's passion for support for the Canadian Armed Forces. But when Harper Conservatives were in power, when the member was a parliamentary secretary of National Defence, at that time did not support the proper investments in the Canadian Armed Forces. Hence the reason why we were in this situation, Mr. Speaker. That's why back in 2016, Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Armed Forces, as we directed, to start recruiting more pilots, Mr. Speaker, because we knew that we not only need pilots, Mr. Speaker, we also need technicians to make sure that we have enough fighters, and our new competition that we have already launched will make sure that we have the appropriate...
The Honourable Member for Northwest Territories.
Mr. Speaker, far too many Northern Canadians are energy insecure. Most communities in Northwest Territories rely on diesel as their primary energy source, and several use diesel as backup source for other aging energy infrastructure. Diesel energy generation is both significant source of carbon pollution and very expensive for families and businesses. Can the Minister of Infrastructure tell this House what the government is doing to help northern communities be more greener, more sustainable, while ensuring they have a secure source of affordable energy?
Hear, hear. Honourable Minister.
A good question.
Really good question.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for his hard work for Canada's North. I was really pleased to join him in the Northwest Territories last week to announce investments of over $14 million to upgrade the Snare Forks hydro plant and also $30 million to help build 4 wind turbines in Inuvik, the first project under the Arctic Energy Fund, Mr. Speaker. These projects will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve the lives of residents in the Northwest Territories. We will continue to work with Northern Canadians Canadians to ensure they have access to reliable and sustainable energy sources now and for the years to come, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, what happens when the union representing 13,000 media workers announced that they're going to campaign against the Conservatives and for the Liberals? The government and the Liberals announced lots of dollars just a week later. Many respected journalists have expressed their discomfort with this incestuous practice. The question is simple. Instead of really dealing with structural problems, is the government perhaps trying to buy out the media as an election approaches? The Honourable Minister. A conspiracy theory, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we acknowledge the importance of professional journalism. Journalism is they're an important part of our society. It's the foundation of our democracy. That's why invested in journalists. We've supported CBC, we've supported local media, and we continue to work with various stakeholders, unions, etc., to see how we can work together based on a very simple process and principle to protect the independence of the media. We understand that on this side of the House. I wonder if they understand it on the other.
Dina, Bulkley Valley.
Here's a story for you, Mr. Speaker. Imagine you hired somebody, and after a while they said, you know what, I'm quitting. But then 8 months later, you found out they were still taking a salary without having done a day's worth of work. Well, that's exactly what the MP from St. Leonard, St. Michel has done. Yeah. What kind of Prime Minister would condone this kind of behavior? And can't Liberals understand it's exactly this sense of entitlement that drives Canadians crazy? So will the Liberals join with us in calling for an investigation by the Ethics Commissioner into this deplorable actions? Yes or no? Yeah.
While it's a little unclear whether this is under the heading of government business, I see the honourable order. The honourable member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie will come to order. Order. I see the honourable government House leader rising to answer.
Mr. Speaker, if you recognize that it's not government business, we should not be answering the question. I think we all know that we have the utmost respect for the rules here. When it does come to the honourable member's question, he knows very well that the MP has issued a statement. He knows very well that we will always work with the Commissioner's office. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, agriculture is exciting and dynamic and full of opportunities, but not without challenges. The Agriculture Committee is currently looking at mental health challenges facing our farmers, ranchers, and producers. Our commitment to farmers goes well beyond the best economic framework for growing their businesses. Can the Minister tell us about government initiatives designed to support the mental health of Canadian farmers? The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. And
thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Shefford and all the members of the Agricultural Committee for their hard work on this very important issue. Together with my parliamentary secretary, we're working with Farm Credit Canada to reduce the stigma around mental health with the publication delivered this week to all Canadian farms. We also announced a new partnership with 4-H Canada to support mental health and physical health, and we're working with Farm Management Canada to support the Canadian farmer. We will continue to work together to promote mental health in the agricultural sector. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, government bailout investment has no place in an independent Canadian news industry. How independent can thousands of journalists at struggling news organizations across the country be if their employers are dependent on government subsidies, slush fund tax relief, or direct cash bailouts? Mr. Speaker, again, and I don't want to hear about millions more for the CBC, why can't the Liberals understand that a media bailout in an election year is simply unacceptable?
Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we acknowledge the fundamental role played by our journalists. They are professional journalists who work is based on facts. Professional journalists play a fundamental role in our society. They are one of the pillars of our democracy, Mr. Speaker. We work with them. We are discussing with the various media groups and associations, looking at cooperation, and it's based on a fundamental principle, Mr. Speaker, to preserve journalism. It's a fundamental process. That's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, healthcare costs are going up year after year in Quebec, and what does Ottawa do? Threatens to cut transfers if Quebec doesn't comply with its demands. As if patients in Quebec needed that. As if people in our hospitals needed that. To be in a battle with the Prime Minister. Instead of threatening to weaken our healthcare system, will the Minister of Finance commit to restoring the 6% increase to health transfers in a statement tomorrow?
La Santé.
The Honourable Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, we will not authorize a two-speed system. It doesn't work. Having more money and receiving care more quickly is not the right way. We will continue to work together in order to protect our healthcare system to better serve all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. All the same comments. Ottawa is already failing to meet its commitments to health transfer. Year after year, Ottawa is doing less and less, and now the Minister of Health is threatening to weaken the healthcare system even more at the expense of our people, Quebecers, Mr. Speaker. But the Minister of Finance can take action now. Will he commit to restoring bringing the increase in the transfers up to 6% in his economic statement tomorrow, yes or no? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We believe that what we need for healthcare is the health card, not a credit card. Across the country, our health system is something we are proud of. People can achieve and receive care without having to pay. Quebec and all of the provinces can use our healthcare system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The
Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, Tufik Manamish has lost hope. Being detained in Cuba against his will since July 7, 2017, he runs a risk of being thrown in prison any day now. And even if the Cuban Supreme Court quashed his conviction due to procedural errors, a new trial with the same judge, same prosecutors, same procedures awaits him and may well wrongly convict him again. Can the Minister of Global Affairs take action immediately to protect a citizen who is a victim of abuse of power?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Consular Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Consular officials are providing assistance to Canadians, as we know, and consular officials are in contact with local authorities to gather information. Of course, we're governed by the Privacy Act, and I can't say anything more at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board is rising on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to table in both official languages on behalf of 86 departments and agencies the departmental results reports for 2017 to 2018, and if I may add, Mr. Speaker, what great results they are. Thank
you.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré with a point of order. Mr. Speaker, I would like the Minister of the Francophonie to apologize when she says that we on this side of the House do not work for Francophones. I sit on the Committee of Official Languages and have done so for years, and I am standing up now. That is a point of debate. I'm sorry.
I rise on a point of order. I believe if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion that the government provide the date upon which the budget will balance itself, and that it provide this date tomorrow. Thank you.